"Move her out of the way," Officer Daniel Mercer said, loud enough for every camera in the marble lobby to hear. The word sliced through the polished calm of City Hall like a siren in the middle of church. Phones rose instantly. Heads turned. Conversations died mid-sentence. And standing at the center of it all was a black woman in a navy coat, one hand resting on a leather folder, the other calmly at her side, as if chaos were something happening to someone else. It was 8:12 on a gray Tuesday morning in Richmond, Virginia, and City Hall was already packed shoulder to shoulder. Reporters lined the front steps. Staffers rushed across the checkered floors carrying clipboards and coffee cups. Security radios crackled with clipped instructions. In less than 15 minutes, the mayor was scheduled to announce the largest infrastructure package the city had seen in decades. Money, cameras, power, ambition, everything was in the building at once. And Daniel Mercer loved mornings like this. 6'2", jaw set hard, uniform pressed so sharply it looked ironed onto him, Mercer carried himself like a man who believed rules were only useful when he was the one enforcing them. He had spent 12 years turning posture into authority and suspicion into instinct. To him, hesitation was weakness. Certainty was control. So when he saw the woman walking through the main entrance without an escort, without flashing credentials, without the anxious energy everyone else seemed to carry, something in him tightened. She didn't rush. She didn't explain herself. She simply entered as though the building had been waiting for her. That bothered him more than he could admit. He called, stepping into her path. "Restricted access today. You need to leave." She stopped. Slowly. Her eyes lifted to meet his, steady and unreadable. She looked to be in her 40s, poised, composed, with the kind of stillness that made loud people uncomfortable. "I'm exactly where I need to be," she said. Her voice was calm, low, certain. Mercer gave a short laugh. Around them, a few staffers slowed their steps. A camera lens turned. "No, you're not," he replied. "This area is for officials, invited guests, and authorized personnel." She glanced past him toward the grand staircase where banners hung behind a temporary podium. Then back to him. "I know." There was no anger in her tone. No fear either. Just a confidence so effortless it felt almost rude. Mercer stepped closer. "Then you also know I'm asking you nicely before this becomes a problem." Somewhere near the metal detectors, someone whispered, "What's happening?" Another phone lifted. The woman adjusted the cuff of her coat and looked around the room as if studying architecture. "Officer," she said, "are you sure this is how you want to begin your morning?" He felt heat rise behind his collar. People were watching now. Waiting. Nothing irritated him more than being made to look uncertain in public. "Last warning," he said, reaching for the rope line beside the entrance. "You don't belong here." A hush rolled across the lobby. Even the clicking heels on the stone floor seemed to pause. The woman didn't move. Didn't flinch. Didn't argue. She only held his gaze with a patience that felt strangely dangerous. Then, from the balcony above, a microphone screeched softly to life. Footsteps approached the rail. And a familiar voice, measured, official, carrying the weight of a room trained to obey, said, "Officer Mercer, step away from Governor Brooks immediately." The silence hit harder than shouting ever could. Daniel Mercer froze with one hand still near the rope barrier, his fingers stiff as if they no longer belonged to him. Across the marble lobby, every eye moved from the officer to the woman he had just tried to remove. Reporters lowered their whispers. Staffers stopped pretending to be busy. Even the security radio seemed quieter now, as though the building itself understood something important had shifted. Above them, Mayor Thomas Reed stood at the balcony microphone, one hand gripping the rail, his expression sharpened by disbelief. "I said step away from Governor Brooks immediately," he repeated, slower this time, each word landing like a stamp on wet concrete. Mercer turned upward first, then back toward the woman in front of him. "Governor Evelyn Brooks." The name traveled through the room in stunned murmurs. Some people recognized her at once. Others only knew they were watching a man realize his certainty had just collapsed in public. Evelyn Brooks did not smile. She did not smirk. She simply straightened the sleeve of her coat and looked at Mercer with the same calm expression she had worn from the moment she entered. "Officer," she said quietly, "now would be a good time to listen." His hand dropped immediately. The confidence that had filled his posture minutes earlier drained so fast it was almost visible. "Governor, I was following protocol," he said, voice thinner now, searching for footing that no longer existed. A camera flash burst from the left side of the lobby. Then another. Then 6 more in rapid succession. Reed descended the staircase quickly, 2 aides rushing behind him. He crossed the floor with practiced urgency and extended both hands toward Brooks. "Governor, on behalf of the city, I apologize for this completely unacceptable welcome." She shook his hand once, firm and brief. "Save the apology for after the cameras are gone," she replied. "Right now, we have work to do." Reed nodded like a student corrected by a respected teacher. Around them, people exchanged looks that said more than words could. Daniel Mercer stood alone in the widening space no one wanted to share with him. A senior security supervisor approached from the east corridor, face pale and jaw tight. "Officer Mercer, surrender your access card and step aside pending review." Mercer blinked. "Sir, this is a misunderstanding." "No," the supervisor said. "This is documentation." Another wave of phones lifted. Somewhere near the entrance, a young intern whispered, "He really said she did not belong here." The sentence moved through the crowd like smoke. Evelyn Brooks heard it. She turned slightly, enough for the room to settle again. "That phrase has followed too many people into too many buildings," she said. Her voice was not loud, yet everyone heard it. Schools. Offices. Courtrooms. City halls. Usually spoken by someone who mistakes position for wisdom. No one moved. No one interrupted. Reed gestured toward the stage area, suddenly eager to redirect history. Before it hardened against him. "Governor, if you are ready, the podium is prepared." She glanced once more at Mercer, who now stared at the floor as though answers might be written there. "Almost," she said. Then she faced the room. "Before I speak about roads, budgets, and policy, let us clear one thing up. Public buildings do not belong to the people who guard the doors. They belong to the people who walk through them." A hush deeper than the first settled over the lobby. Mercer closed his eyes for one brief second. When he opened them, Governor Brooks was already walking toward the podium, and the room was following her. Governor Evelyn Brooks stepped behind the podium as if she had done it 1,000 times, which she had. The seal of the city gleamed beneath the lights, cameras hummed from every angle, and rows of officials suddenly sat straighter than they had minutes earlier. Mayor Thomas Reed moved to the side, careful now, respectful now, the way people often become when truth arrives publicly. Daniel Mercer remained near the rope barrier with his access badge removed, hands clasped in front of him, trying to disappear in a room that would not let him. Brooks opened the leather folder she had carried through the doors and placed 3 pages on the podium. She looked across the lobby, not rushed, not angry, simply present. "Good morning," she began. "I came here to discuss transportation grants, water systems, and school repairs. I did not expect to begin with a lesson in access." A few uneasy laughs flickered and died. No one was sure if laughter was allowed anymore. But perhaps, she continued, this was the more urgent topic. Her eyes moved across the crowd and settled nowhere for long. Every day in this country, people are asked to prove they belong before they are allowed to participate. Sometimes it is subtle. Sometimes it is spoken directly. Sometimes it is hidden behind policy, procedure, or a smile. Reed lowered his gaze. Several department heads shifted in their seats. A reporter near the front stopped typing just to listen. Brooks turned one page over. "I requested no escort this morning for a reason. I wanted to enter the same way. Ordinary citizens enter. Through the front door. Through security. Through assumption. The room tightened again. She had planned this. That realization passed from face to face like cold wind. For 6 months, she said, my office has reviewed complaints regarding public access in municipal buildings across this state. Complaints from veterans, teachers, elderly residents, small business owners, and citizens who were treated as intrusions in spaces built with their own tax dollars. Cameras clicked harder now. Mercer stared at the floor, then at the podium, then back down again. Brooks did not mention him by name. She did not need to. Today was not about embarrassing one person, she said. It was about exposing one habit. Her voice remained level, but every syllable carried weight. The habit of deciding who belongs by appearance. The habit of mistaking confidence for authority and authority for character. Somewhere in the back row, someone whispered, she set this up. Another voice answered softly, no. He did. Brooks reached for a glass of water, took one measured sip, and continued. Now let us talk about the future. Screens behind her lit up with maps, budget charts, bridge photos, school roof estimates, and transit lines stretching through neighborhoods long ignored. She moved through numbers with calm precision. $180 million in infrastructure grants. New lead pipe removal in 3 counties. Expanded bus routes for working families. Repairs for 12 aging school buildings before winter. The room that had entered expecting theater was now receiving governance. And she was excellent at it. Reed nodded repeatedly as though agreement might erase earlier silence. Staffers scribbled notes with renewed urgency. Even reporters who had arrived hoping for scandal found themselves pulled into policy. Yet every few minutes, I still drifted back to Mercer. He felt it. Everyone did. Brooks closed the folder at last. Government is not a costume, she said. It is service. If we forget that, then polished floors and grand staircases mean nothing. She stepped back from the microphone. Applause began cautiously, then spread in waves. Until the marble walls carried it upward. Daniel Mercer did not clap. He simply stood there, hearing the sound of a room rewarding the very dignity he had mistaken for weakness. The applause lingered longer than anyone expected, rolling through the marble lobby in uneven waves before fading into the softer sounds of chairs moving, cameras lowering, and officials suddenly eager to look productive. Governor Evelyn Brooks stepped away from the podium and spoke quietly with 2 aides from her office. Mayor Thomas Reed remained close, smiling too often, nodding too much, the way men do when trying to repair damage no one asked them to create. Daniel Mercer still stood near the entrance, separated now not by rope barriers but by silence. No one approached him. No one offered reassurance. Even the officers he usually joked with kept their distance, studying phones or pretending to check schedules. Public humiliation has a strange gravity. It teaches people how quickly loyalty can become observation. A senior security supervisor returned carrying a slim folder and a city-issued tablet. Officer Mercer, he said, voice professional and flat, you are relieved of duty for the remainder of the day pending formal review. You will accompany Human Resources to Conference Room B. Mercer swallowed. This is excessive. No, the supervisor replied. This is standard. The word landed harder than a reprimand. Standard. The very shield Mercer had tried to hide behind minutes earlier. He glanced across the lobby, perhaps hoping Brooks would intervene, soften the moment, say it had all gone too far. But she was listening to a transit engineer explain bridge timelines, focused on citizens who needed actual solutions. She never looked his way. Reed noticed the scene and hesitated before walking over. Daniel, he said quietly, dropping the public voice he used for microphones. You should cooperate. Mercer stared at him. I was protecting the building. Reed exhaled through his nose. You were protecting an assumption. For a moment, the mayor looked older than he had on stage. Tired, perhaps, of watching preventable failures become headlines. Mercer had no answer. Conference room. B sat on the second floor beside a hallway lined with framed photos of former city leaders, all smiling with the certainty of their own eras. Inside, fluorescent lights hummed above a long oak table. A human resources director named Linda Carver waited with a legal pad, 2 forms, and the expression of someone who had spent years cleaning up avoidable messes. "Please sit," she said. Mercer remained standing for a second too long, then lowered himself into the chair. "This process includes your statement, witness accounts, and security footage review." "I did nothing malicious," he said quickly. "I identified a potential issue." Carver folded her hands. "Did you ask for identification?" He paused. "No. Did you request assistance from protocol staff?" "No. Did you recognize the governor?" "No. Did you assume she did not belong?" The room went still. Mercer shifted in his seat. "I assessed the situation." Carver wrote something down. The sound of her pen seemed louder than it should have been. That was not the question. Downstairs, Governor Brooks had begun a smaller round table with teachers, utility managers, and neighborhood leaders. No cameras now. No applause. Just work. She listened more than she spoke. She asked specific questions about bus delays, broken sidewalks, outdated boilers in elementary schools. People who expected ceremony found competence instead. Upstairs, Mercer felt something unfamiliar settling into his chest. Not anger. Not fear. Recognition. He replayed the moment at the door, her calm voice, his impatience, the phrase he chose, the eyes watching. He had believed authority meant never having to reconsider yourself in real time. Now reconsideration was all he had. Carver slid a form across the table. Administrative leave begins immediately while review is conducted. He looked at the page but did not touch it. Through the conference room window, he could see the city skyline under a pale morning sky. Streets full of people heading to jobs, schools, appointments, responsibilities. The same people he had sworn to serve. Down below, applause rose again from the lobby. Not loud this time. Earned. Mercer lowered his eyes to the form. Understanding at last that the hardest thing to lose was not a badge. It was the story he had told himself about why he deserved it. By late morning, City Hall had split into 2 worlds. On the first floor, Governor Evelyn Brooks moved from table to table with engineers, school administrators, and neighborhood advocates, discussing pipe replacement schedules, bridge inspections, and how to shorten bus routes that cost working families an extra 40 minutes each day. In Conference Room B upstairs, time moved slower. Daniel Mercer sat alone now, the form signed, his duty belt removed, his access card surrendered, listening to the air conditioner hum like a machine with no opinion. There is a special kind of quiet that follows public certainty when it breaks. It does not shout. It simply stays. Linda Carver returned carrying a printed packet and placed it neatly in front of him. "Witness summaries," she said. "You may review them." Mercer looked down at statements from a receptionist, 2 city clerks, a camera operator, and another officer stationed near the metal detectors. Their words were factual, restrained, and somehow harsher because of it. Officer Mercer raised his voice. Officer Mercer did not request identification. Officer Mercer stated she did not belong here. Officer Mercer ignored opportunities to de-escalate. He read each line twice, hoping context might appear between sentences. It did not. "People are turning this into something else," he muttered. Carver remained standing. "No. They are describing what happened." He pushed the papers back. "I treat everyone the same." Carver tilted her head slightly, not skeptical, just experienced. People often say that when they mean they treat everyone according to assumptions. She left before he could answer. Downstairs, Brooks entered the public service counter unannounced. Residents waiting in line straightened in surprise. An elderly man clutching permit paperwork nearly dropped his folder. A mother with 2 children moved aside, embarrassed by the stroller blocking the aisle. Brooks smiled gently. "Please stay where you are," she said. I am here to see how long this line takes. Within minutes she was asking clerks how many staff positions were vacant, why signage was only in one language, and why seniors had nowhere to sit. She took notes herself. No A did it for her. People noticed that. Real authority often looks less dramatic than people expect. It asks questions and waits for honest answers. Upstairs, Mercer stared through the conference room window at the city below. He remembered joining the force at 24, believing structure would make him important. Rules, uniform, rank, routine. It had felt cleaner than the uncertainty of ordinary life. Over time, however, he had confused command with worth. If people listened, he mattered. If they obeyed, he was right. Somewhere along the way, suspicion became habit and habit became personality. A soft knock interrupted him. Officer Miguel Santos stepped inside carrying 2 coffees. I did not know if you wanted one, he said. Mercer looked surprised. Why are you here? Santos shrugged. Because no one should sit alone with their worst morning. He set 1 cup down. Also because you need to hear something from someone who works beside you, not above you. Mercer said nothing. Santos leaned against the wall. You think this happened because she was the governor? It did not. He pointed toward the packet of witness statements. It happened because you decided who she was before she spoke. Mercer looked away. You do not know me. I know enough, Santos replied calmly. I know I have watched you challenge some people harder than others. I know I stopped noticing because it was easier. That part is on me. The honesty in the room was heavier than accusation. Downstairs, another small round of applause rose after Brooks announced immediate seating areas for seniors, translated signage within 30 days, and an audit of citizen access complaints statewide. Upstairs, Mercer wrapped both hands around the untouched coffee. It had gone lukewarm. What happens now? He asked quietly. Santos answered without drama. That depends on whether you want your problem to be this morning, or the man who created it. The question Officer Miguel Santos left behind did not leave with him. It remained in conference room B. After the door closed, hanging in the recycled air like something written across the walls. Daniel Mercer sat alone, hands around the paper cup, staring at coffee gone cold. Was the problem this morning, or the man who created it? He had spent years believing consequences were events. Complaints. Suspensions. Bad headlines. Temporary discomfort. But now another possibility stood in front of him, quieter and harder to outrun. What if the real consequence was becoming someone who could no longer recognize himself honestly? Downstairs, Governor Evelyn Brooks had moved to the records office, where old filing cabinets stood beside newer digital kiosks that worked only when they felt like it. She listened as clerks described outdated systems, delayed permits, and residents who returned 3 or 4 times because forms were confusing. She did not rush them. She did not perform concern for cameras, because there were no cameras now. Most had followed the mayor to another room where he was trying to reclaim relevance through a smaller press availability. Brooks asked one clerk how many people gave up and went home each week. The woman blinked, then answered softly, more than we like to admit. Brooks wrote it down. Upstairs, Linda Carver returned with a second document. Administrative review panel meets at 2 o'clock, she said. You may submit a written statement before then. Mercer looked at the blank page clipped on top. What am I supposed to say? Carver studied him for a moment. That depends. Do you want to defend your actions, or explain them? She placed a pen beside the paper and left again. The distinction unsettled him. Defend or explain. One protects pride. The other risks truth. He lowered the pen to the page and wrote the sentence he wanted first. I followed procedure. He stared at it, then crossed it out so hard the paper tore slightly. Next he wrote, I made a mistake. It looked small, insufficient, polished. He crossed that out too. Minutes passed. Footsteps came and went in the hallway. Somewhere below, applause rose briefly and faded. Finally he began again. I judged someone before I knew anything about her. I relied on instinct when I should have relied on professionalism. I spoke in a way that reflected assumptions I did not admit I carried. He stopped writing and read the lines twice. They sounded unlike him, which was precisely why they might be true. In the lobby, Brooks now stood with a group of maintenance workers who rarely appeared in photographs but knew every leak, every failing hinge, every hallway draft. One man in his 60s told her he had worked in the building 28 years and had never once been asked what needed fixing. Brooks smiled. Then we have wasted 28 years of expertise. The workers laughed, surprised into it. She asked for a full facilities walkthrough schedule within 10 days. Respect, she understood, was often just attention delivered consistently. At 1:30, Mercer was escorted downstairs through a side corridor to avoid the main lobby. He noticed the route immediately. Doors he had once controlled now guided him quietly out of sight. As he passed the public service counter, he saw Brooks speaking with the mother and 2 children who had been waiting earlier. She crouched slightly to hear the youngest child describe a broken playground slide in their neighborhood park. Then she stood, thanked him seriously, and asked an aide to write down the address. No speech. No flourish. Just response. Mercer slowed without meaning to. Brooks turned and saw him. Their eyes met for one brief second. There was no triumph in her expression. No revenge. Only recognition that he was now facing something she had likely faced many times before, being judged by a room while trying to remain steady inside it. He looked away first. When he reached the elevator, he glanced down at the folded statement in his hand. The badge had once made him feel taller. Today, a single page of honest words felt heavier than metal ever had. At 2 o'clock sharp, conference room A filled with the careful stillness of people deciding someone else's future. 3 review panel members sat behind a narrow table with folders opened, pens aligned, and expressions trained to reveal nothing too early. Linda Carver sat to one side with policy binders stacked neatly beside her. Daniel Mercer entered. Without uniform pieces that once completed his silhouette. No badge. No radio. No belt. Just a grey dress shirt, dark slacks, and a folded statement in his hand. It was the first time in years he had walked into an official room without visible authority. He noticed how different the air felt. Please be seated, said Harold Whitman, chair of the panel and deputy city administrator. Mercer Saturday. Whitman adjusted his glasses. This is an administrative review regarding conduct, judgment, and citizen access protocol during this morning's incident. The phrase "this morning's incident" sounded sterile compared with the memory itself. Yet perhaps that was how institutions survived their own embarrassments, by reducing them to vocabulary. Witness statements were summarized. Security footage timestamps were noted. Questions followed with methodical precision. Did he request credentials? No. Did he consult protocol staff? No. Did he raise his voice? Yes. Did he state the citizen did not belong? Mercer hesitated, then answered quietly. Yes. Pens moved across paper. No one looked shocked. Facts rarely perform surprise. Do you dispute any of the witness accounts? Whitman asked. Mercer unfolded the page in his hand. No, sir. Then you may read your statement. He looked down. The room waited. For years he had trusted improvisation, command tone, quick answers. But truth required slower muscles. I entered this morning believing confidence in my judgment was enough, he began. It was not. I judged a person before I knew anything about her role, her purpose, or her right to be there. More importantly, I judged her before I treated her with the professionalism every citizen deserves. The words sounded plain, almost small, yet they cost more than excuses ever had. I relied on assumptions I should have challenged in myself long ago. I understand now that my conduct reflected poorly on this department and created harm beyond embarrassment. He paused, then continued. I cannot ask to be seen fairly if I am unwilling to see others fairly first. Carver stopped writing for half a second. Whitman leaned back slightly. Another panel member, retired Judge Elena Porter, studied Mercer with the kind of gaze that measured sincerity by what came after prepared lines. Why now? She asked. Why not previous complaints, previous coaching notes, previous warnings? Mercer swallowed. There it was. The question beneath all questions. Because until today, he said slowly, I thought consequences were something that happened to me. I did not understand they were also things I caused for others. No one spoke for several seconds. Downstairs, Governor Evelyn Brooks was preparing to leave after a final meeting with transit planners. News of the hearing had reached staff already, because buildings carry stories faster than elevators. She signed 2 directives at a side table, statewide access audits and mandatory bias review training for municipal frontline security teams. Then she asked for no press conference. Results can speak later, she said. Back upstairs, Whitman closed the folder. Officer Mercer, the panel has reached an interim decision. Mercer straightened unconsciously. You are suspended without pay for 30 days pending completion of retraining, reassignment review, and reinstatement evaluation. Further misconduct will result in termination. The sentence landed firmly, but not cruelly. Judge Porter added one final line. This is discipline, not destiny. What you become next remains undecided. Mercer nodded once. He had expected anger. He had feared humiliation. What he received instead was responsibility, which felt heavier than both. As he exited the room, the hallway windows caught the afternoon sun, throwing long rectangles of light across the floor. In the lobby below, he could see Brooks walking toward the main doors, surrounded not by guards, but by citizens thanking her. She paused for each one. Mercer stood still at the railing, watching a kind of power he had never been trained to recognize. The afternoon light had softened by the time Daniel Mercer stepped out of City Hall through a side entrance reserved for staff. The same stone steps he had climbed hundreds of times now felt unfamiliar beneath his shoes. Across the street, reporters still lingered near satellite vans, hoping for one more quote, one more stumble, one more frame to replay by evening. Mercer kept his head down and walked past them without being recognized at first. Without the uniform, he was simply another man leaving work tired and quiet. It unsettled him how quickly symbols disappear. He crossed 2 blocks to a small coffee shop he had passed for years but never entered. Inside, the smell of roasted beans and cinnamon replaced marble, polish, and policy. He ordered black coffee, then sat by the window where he could still see the upper edge of City Hall through bare tree branches. At the next table, 2 women in business attire were talking in low voices. Did you hear what she said about public buildings? One asked. Best line all year, the other replied. Neither noticed him. That, too, felt new. Mercer sipped the coffee and tasted almost nothing. His phone buzzed 3 times in 10 minutes. 2 messages from officers asking what happened. One from his brother asking if the news clip was really him. He turned the phone face down. Some truths become easier to hear only after the world hears them first. Across town, Governor Evelyn Brooks had not gone to a private suite or luxury luncheon. She was at Franklin Elementary School, touring a boiler room that had failed twice during winter. The principal apologized for the noise, the old paint, the patched ceiling tiles. Brooks waved it off and asked how many students used portable heaters in classrooms last January. 6 rooms, the principal answered. Brooks wrote it down. She asked to meet the custodian next. Real priorities often sound unglamorous until children are involved. Back at the coffee shop, Mercer watched pedestrians pass the window carrying groceries, backpacks, dry cleaning, babies in strollers, ordinary burdens. He wondered how many times he had looked at people without actually seeing them. Santos entered unexpectedly, spotted him, and walked over with a paper bag in one hand. You vanished dramatically, he said, taking the seat across from him. Mercer gave a tired half smile. I was aiming for quietly. Santos slid the bag across the table. Inside was a blueberry muffin. My wife says shame is easier to survive with food. Mercer almost laughed. Almost. You came to lecture me again. Santos shook his head. No. I came to tell you something useful. People are talking about the suspension. Some think it was deserved. Some think it was too harsh. Most will move on by next week. He leaned forward. You are the only one who has to live with what happened after the headlines fade. Mercer looked out the window. I do not know what to do with that. Start smaller, Santos said. Learn names. Listen longer. Ask one more question before making one more assumption. He stood to leave, then added, character is usually built in habits, not speeches. After Santos left, Mercer sat for a long time with those words. Near 5 o'clock, a city sedan pulled from the curb in front of City Hall. Through the glass he recognized Brooks in the back seat speaking with an aide. The car paused at the traffic light. For 1 second she looked toward the coffee shop window. Maybe she saw him. Maybe she did not. Then the light changed and the sedan moved on. Mercer expected relief when it disappeared. Instead he felt responsibility settle deeper. She had walked into his building and revealed his habits. Then she had spent the rest of the day fixing things that mattered more than him. As dusk touched the street, Mercer opened his phone, found the department training portal, and enrolled in the first voluntary course available, Community Trust and Public Service Foundations. It began next Monday at 8 o'clock. For the first time all day, he chose something before circumstance chose it for him. Monday arrived with clear skies and the kind of sharp morning air that made the city feel newly washed. At 8 o'clock, Daniel Mercer walked into the Public Service Training Center carrying a notebook instead of authority. The building sat only 6 miles from City Hall, yet it felt farther than that. No polished lobby. No cameras. No salutes. Just folding tables, fluorescent lights, and a printed sign that read Community Trust and Public Service Foundations. 12 participants sat scattered through the room, transit staff, housing clerks, a park supervisor, 2 rookie officers, and Mercer in the back row by instinct. Then he moved to the middle row by choice. Instructor Naomi Ellis entered carrying a stack of binders and the steady presence of someone who did not need volume to command attention. Good morning, she said. This course is not about image management. It is about habits. The public rarely meets our intentions. They meet our behavior. Mercer wrote the sentence down immediately. For the next 3 hours they studied complaint patterns, communication failures, de-escalation through respect, and the cost of making people feel unwelcome in spaces funded by their own taxes. Ellis asked each participant to describe a time they had been dismissed unfairly. Stories surfaced slowly, then all at once. A veteran ignored at a permit desk. A mother assumed unable to pay a fee. A bilingual clerk treated as invisible until translation was needed. When it was Mercer's turn, the room grew still with recognition. News moves fast in cities. I was the person doing the dismissing, he said. No excuses followed. No speech. Just that. Ellis nodded once. Then your work begins where honesty started. Across town, Governor Evelyn Brooks returned to City Hall for a follow-up meeting announced only that morning. New multilingual signs were already being installed near the public counters. Additional seating had appeared in waiting areas. A maintenance request board listed deadlines instead of vague promises. Progress had begun not because systems wanted to change, but because someone insisted they could. Mayor Thomas Reed met her at the entrance personally this time. No one blocked the doorway. No one needed to be told who belonged. Near noon, the training class ended early for a practical exercise. Participants were assigned to observe public service spaces and note barriers people faced. Mercer's group was sent to City Hall. Fate, he thought, had a dry sense of humor. He entered through the front doors with the others, no uniform, no priority, no shortcut. The lobby looked the same and completely different. Residents sat in new chairs. Clear signs directed visitors in English, Spanish, and Vietnamese. Staff greeted people before they reached the desk. Small changes, yet the whole room breathed easier. Mercer stood near the same spot where he had once raised his voice. He could still hear the echo of it if he let himself. Mr. Mercer. He turned. Governor Brooks stood 10 feet away with Naomi Ellis and Mayor Reed beside her. She wore the same calm expression, though today there was warmth in it. Governor, he said, straightening unconsciously before remembering he no longer needed to perform posture. Brooks glanced at the notebook in his hand. Training. Yes. Good. She stepped closer, lowering her voice enough to make the moment private inside a public room. Do not waste energy trying to be the man you were before last week. That man is expensive to maintain. Mercer swallowed, then nodded. I am sorry. She considered him for a second. Use that sentence less. Use better actions more. Then she turned to greet a family entering the building. Reed hurried after her. Ellis gave Mercer a small smile and rejoined the class. He remained where he was, watching citizens move through the doors without tension. Nothing dramatic happened next. No music. No applause. Just people entering their own building with ordinary dignity. Sometimes justice is not thunder. Sometimes it is a chair where there was none, a sign someone can read, a line that moves fairly, a door that opens without suspicion. Mercer opened his notebook and wrote one final sentence beneath all the others. A badge can control a doorway, but character decides what enters with you.